Welcome to Paulogia Live, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians live here from Paulogia Studios here in lovely Nova Scotia, Canada. It's been a while since we've had one of our regular Paulogia Live shows, so welcome to the show. Hopefully, I remember what I'm doing and you remember how to enjoy having a lovely live stream together with me. Last week I had a debate which kind of took place of some live streams, and it's been kind of hectic, but I'm excited to be back, excited to be going here. We have some great topics. I think they're great. I scolded someone today for introducing their stories with hyperbole. Nah, I have some meh stories that hopefully we will enjoy together and have a great time. As always with Paulogia Live, we have some predetermined topics that we're going to cover all together, and I hope you're having on this lovely afternoon, evening, morning, whatever it is that you're looking at this. Let me know in the chat what time it is for you. Actually, I won't look at the chat. Let other people know in the chat what time it is, which is actually where I was going with this. I also love to interact with you guys via Super Chat, which we do after the end of the predetermined topic. So if you have a question, comment, want to leave something to discuss afterwards, we will make time for that, and those will be the Super Chat times. So today we have, we're going to start with not with an apologist, but we're going to start with something that caught my eye during the Super Bowl. So I, in the past number of years, have been a bit of a movie trailer avoider. I try not to see movie trailers because I feel like if it's a movie I'm going to go see anyway, that it kind of usually dampens some kind of element for me. Either my expectations get too high, too low, a scene is spoiled, something that I was better not seeing the trailers. The trouble is when you go see a movie in a theater, they just show the trailers right there. And I recently saw a trailer that I didn't really want to see, but I saw it, and it had something that I feel like we all need to talk about happen right there. So let's get the video feed up. And where I want to start, the trailer that I'm talking about is for the upcoming Indiana Jones film, Indiana Jones 5, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I think is what the name of the film is. Now, as many of you know, I worked on both the Star Wars franchise, but also I worked on the Indiana Jones franchise in various capacities. So, these are near and dear to my heart. And in my recent discussion with Frank Turek, where we were discussing pop culture, pop media, and how it relates to the Gospels, we actually had a bit of a discussion about how Han Solo, to me, played by Harrison Ford. Let me get rid of that smiling face to there.
Jedi were real.
Oh,
I used to wonder about
tech difficulties. Losing my mind. Do you want to get Kurt's face off there? All right, let's reset. Harrison Ford, Han Solo, to me, plays a great skeptic. So in the first Star Wars film, A New Hope, Episode 4, Han Solo plays the foil of all of us who is not going to believe, who's been all over the galaxy, and there's nothing to make him think that there's all one powerful force that controls everything, right? That's the line he gives on the Millennium Falcon. And he plays the foil for the audience. But as we go, as we see things, we eventually get to his appearance in Episode 7. And one of the best scenes in Star Wars Episode 7 is this one.
that myself.
Jedi were real.
I used to wonder about that myself. Thought it was a bunch of mumbo jumbo. A magical power holding together good and evil, the dark side and the light. Crazy thing is,
So pause there. A for just copyright stuff, but also B. So that summarizes what we just talked about. In the first film, he thought it was all mumbo jumbo, thought it was ridiculous, but he's gone through a lot of stuff since then, both the events of A New Hope, or of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, but also everything that's happened since. So now, later on, how does Han Solo feel about all this?
it's true. The Force, the Jedi. All of it. all true.
Yeah. And I like to think that's the kind of skeptic that I would be. If I saw the things that Han Solo saw, then I would move from that position because he saw basically Luke and later on Leia and his son. They all were, able to manipulate the Force on a regular basis and by their control and in controlled circumstances in predictable ways, and all these kind of things. He saw enough that he had enough evidence to overcome his previous bias. The extraordinary claim of the Force met its burden of extraordinary evidence for Han Solo. So it makes sense that at this later point in his life, he absolutely would believe all that's true. So great. I think they wrote old Han Solo exactly where a skeptic should go. Now, Harrison Ford's other famous character, Indiana Jones. Similarly, though he's an archaeologist, he, early in his career, when we saw in Raiders Lost Ark, he typically viewed these things, all the prophecies and all the various artifacts that he saw that people thought they had mystical powers and the myths and legends that grew up around them. He was skeptical of all that. However, as we know through the films, different things happened to him. The Ark of the Covenant was revealed and everyone around him died and he was spared because his eyes were closed, or he was able to see the Holy Grail cup, was able to heal his father and also kept Joseph of Arimathea around for centuries. We also have, I think they're the Ikatar stones in Temple of Doom, for example. They also had, different powers. He saw a lot of things. So you'd think that old Indiana Jones would have a similar arc. Unfortunately, here is a clip from the Super Bowl trailer for the new Indiana Jones film.
I don't believe in magic, but a few times in my life, I've seen things I can't explain. And I've come to believe it's not so much what you believe. It's how hard you believe it.
No, that's not right, Indy. It does matter what you believe. The how hard you believe it part, you should know from everything that you've been through, you believed it 0%, right? And yet these things happened and came true despite your complete lack of faith, because at least in the world of Indiana Jones, these are artifacts that had certain powers. So that's the reality of the Indiana Jones world. It absolutely matters what you put your faith in. It's not a matter of how hard you believe it. And that is a frustrating thing that I hear skeptics and non-skeptics alike just throw out there. Now, the virtue is in the believing something. And I may have even subscribed to a bit of that when I was a Christian, though probably not, because I thought most Christians weren't Christian enough for what I thought salvation was worth. But no. Faith is not a virtue, at least by my view. Coming to have correct beliefs that, as far as you are able to ascertain, reflect reality, that's what's going to help you. That's what's worth something. This idea of just casting belief broadly in whatever, and that all beliefs are created equal, probably Christians and I can get on board with that together, actually. That's not the way it should go. So I was disappointed. Maybe the movie vindicates that. Who knows? But the trailer just made me sad. I mean, there's lots of things about Indiana Jones 5 that I'm trepidatious about. But that added to the list. So, but I don't know. What do you think? Am I making too much of this? Would you rather be Han Solo Or would you rather be an Indiana Jones? Or would you rather be something in the middle? Or something else altogether? Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the super chats. Which do you want to be? Han Solo, Indiana Jones? That's my Harrison Ford religion rant of the day and probably of the year, hopefully. All right. But we're going to stick on the themes of Christianity and movies, and in fact the Star Wars films, and even Harrison Ford as we go here. As some of you may know, Kent Hovind, whom I'm doing my best to speak about as little as possible. He's got a lot of stuff going on. You can watch my last video on the Kent Hovind compound to get more details about that. I bring that up only to say that there has been a bit of an exodus from his compound of some of his young minds, some of the people whom he's been molding to either take his place or to be like him, spread the word. Matt Powell recently left, but there's also a young man named Damien who for the last couple of years has been doing the Science Center tours at Dinosaur Adventureland. And Damien also recently decided it was time for him to go and leave Dinosaur Adventureland. I'm not going to speculate as to why those two gentlemen left. I have my own theories, but we'll see if those are borne out. But Damien left, and I just, out of sheer curiosity, I thought, well, what is this ministry that he's leaving Kent Hovind to go start? And his ministry he started is called Treading on Serpents. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Old Testament will know that that's an allusion to, in Genesis chapter 3, God promises Eve that her descendants will tread on the head of the serpent. And that's, I guess, where Damien is putting himself right now. But Damien decided he has been putting up a series of documentaries. And I thought one of them caught my eye because it was about Star Wars. So I thought I would check it out and let's all look at it together, shall we?
What's Star Wars really about? You got Darth Vader here.
By the way, it says on the screen here, it's a clip from the clip that the documentary is supposed to be from, The Popular Cult. I went and watched his full documentary, The Popular Cult, and I could not find this segment in that larger documentary. And he actually mentioned that the documentary was going to be a series of documentaries. So I tried my best as a proper source method, advocate to try and go to the original. Couldn't find it. So this is the Star Wars clip. This is the best we got.
Anakin Skywalker. Very interesting name.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Star Wars franchise, Anakin Skywalker is the original name. The person who eventually became Darth Vader.
You know, when you read the Bible, you will get into the Old Testament where it talks about the sons of Enoch. Let's take a closer look here. Well, if you go to kingjamesbibleonline.org, you can do some...
You know, Damien, if you go to, instead of kingjamesbible.org, you could go to biblegateway.org and you could look at all the translations of the Bible and compare them against each other instead of just blindly accepting whatever the King James Version says, which is a weird quirk of the whole Hovind follower set. I'm not quite sure what their joy is with the King James only stuff, but anyway, I digress. Let's go with King James. That's fine.
Keyword searches on the King James Bible, and you can find the sons of Enoch here. A people great and tall, the children of the Anakims. The Anakims, huh? The children of Anakim.
That sounds a little bit like Anakin. It's not Anakin. It's Anakim. But okay, it sounds kind of the same, I guess.
Enoch. Well, let's look at the Anakims, the sons of Enoch.
Oh.
Deuteronomy, which also were accounted at giants as the Anakims, but the Moabites call them Emims. Deuteronomy, Anakim.
Are we going to tie that together? No, we're just going to raise our voice and let you fill in the blanks about what you think that means. Giants.
Anakims, Joshua. There was none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza and Gath and in Ashdod. There
Clearly, God. Only Anakin's in Gaza. That's Star Wars. Anakin.
remained. They remain. They're still around today. A people great and many and tall as the Anakims. A people great and tall, the children of the Anakims. Moreover, we have seen the sons of the Anakims there.
Did those mean anything to anyone, or is he just reading things from the Bible? So some of you, if you're up on your Star Wars lore, Anakin isn't the only character in Star Wars. So, for example, we have these gentlemen. We have Obi-Wan Kenobi. But Obi-Wan Kenobi, some of you may know, in the first trilogy, he was known as Ben Kenobi. Did you know that Ben is short for Benjamin? Now, if you go, I admit I went to Bible Gateway, but I looked into King James, and look, there's all kinds of results for Benjamin. But his father called him Benjamin. Joseph and Benjamin. Take Benjamin away. Oh, money in their hand, and Benjamin, and rose up. They saw Joseph and Benjamin. Have I made a point? I'm not sure that I've actually made a point about Star Wars or the Bible by doing that.
Constant war with the Anakims from the Promised Land. So back to Star Wars. Do you guys remember one of the last movies in the original series? They fought on the moon of...
Well, it was the actual last movie in that series, but okay. The Moon of Endor. Yes.
Of Endor.
Endor.
The moon of Endor. Where do we find Endor in the Bible?
Well, from the Witch of Endor. So I'm hoping that you will tell us about the Witch of Endor and how she rose people from the dead and how that was bad and God didn't like it. And was it King Solomon who did that? I forget which king was involved. That it was all these bad things that happened. I hope that's where you're going to go, and you'll actually draw connections to Star Wars and this, maybe.
It's mentioned in the book of Samuel. Then said Saul unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And her towns and the inhabitants of Endor, and her towns. These...
So, Endor was really only mentioned once in the movies, a very fleeting mention of the moon of Endor. You know who's mentioned a lot in Star Wars? Not just Ben, but Luke. What if we searched for Luke in the Bible? Well, we only actually get 3 results. Luke, the beloved physician. Only Luke is with me. And then, because thou art lukewarm. That's the extent of Luke being referenced in the Bible. But he's clearly a dude there. Crazily enough, the 2 references of the person named Luke, those are actually, most critical scholars of the Bible consider those to be forged books. But that's neither here nor there. We won't get into that right now. We're trying to connect the Bible to Star Wars.
Names from thousands of years ago recorded in the Bible are still being put out today by the popular cult. You might want to pay attention.
That was the whole thing. So the names are similar to what's in the Bible were used in a fantasy piece 2,000 years later. So you might want to watch out. Okay, I don't know what his point was. I just found, did the raising of the voice help you to figure out what the connection is between Star Wars and the Bible? Was it because the Anakim were like enemies of Hebrews, and the Witch of Endor, who, like, it wasn't Endor the place. There was just a person who lived there, was a person, a witch. Um, so, but these are bad characters. But I also pointed out two Star Wars characters who were like heroes of the Bible. So what am I looking out for? What am I doing here? Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the super chats. I don't know what we were supposed to have learned from that. Even if I believed everything that Damien believed, what what action am I supposed to take? What did we learn? What connection was made? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. All right. That was topic number 2. Topic number 3, we're going to get into some more. We're leaving Star Wars land now. I thank you for indulging me, everyone. You know that, with my past, sometimes I just have to get into it when people bring Star Wars into the mix. All right. But now we're moving on to the normal fare. J. Warner Wallace, our good friend, the cold case detective. And he recently posted a video that he titled, "How Can We Trust Ancient Oral Transmission of the Gospels?" That's also definitely up my alley. How can we trust the ancient oral tradition of the transmission of the Gospels?
If you read the Gospels carefully, you notice that Jesus sends out the disciples preaching in pairs. And of course, what are they preaching? Clearly, he's teaching them. Clearly, he's mentoring them. So they've been mentored in what they have to say by the Master, even before then. Jesus has died and ascends back to heaven. So yeah, there's every confidence that there's.
And two things about.
Okay, so if you don't have the title of this video, this clip doesn't. You kind of are thrown into the deep end here of what was clearly a longer interview on somebody else's channel, but that's fine. All well and good. But if we're supposed to be relating to the ancient oral transmission of the Gospels, the host here, Andy, just wanted to mention that Jesus sent out the disciples in pairs. Not quite sure how that's related to the Gospels. Only 2 of the Gospels were even purported to be written by disciples. But let's see what they have to. I don't know how this is going to connect, but let's see how it goes.
About that. Number one, if you know that Mormon missionaries also go out in pairs, right?
Yep.
And if you can talk about this, that transmission of ideas and how they're presented door to door, it stays the same because it's being transferred down by the pairs. There's always one guy who's got 1 year on the road, one guy who's got 2 years on the road, mentoring the guy with the 1 year.
I guess we did connect it to Star Wars. Always 2 there are. No more. A master and apprentice. They're Sith. The Mormon is Sith? Is that how? No, that's stretching it. Not more than Damien was doing, but that's fine. We're moving past it. Past Star Wars. Okay. So J. Warner Wallace now wants to equate the Mormon missionaries to say they always go out in pairs. And I'm not sure if he's saying the reason for this or a feature of this is that I think where he's going is that a more consistent story is told because you have this constant learning of what happened before. Now, hear me out. What that potentially can preserve is that you are getting some consistency in what is said. But what you're also doing by having 2 people going out there is you are definitely colluding, right? Like you are intermingling the first year person and the rookie. They're going out together, and if they're overlapping and they're mashing, you are definitely influencing the witnessing of the second person with the ideas of the first person. And eventually when 2 people keep telling the same stories over and over, what's going to happen is they start borrowing each other's language. They start thinking that the other person's memories are their memories. This is absolutely a phenomenon. To the extent where you've heard this story enough times, you're going to think that it's yours. But also, none of that tells me anything about whether the original material was true or not. Right? Because at least in the case of the Mormons, now, I suppose in the disciples, you may say, hey, they're solidifying, moving stuff up, that stuff. But here's the other problem. Okay. Kip, I think you have a point there. Yes, the first year person is the rookie. Yeah. the second year person, I suppose. I'm not. I don't know a lot about Mormon mission work. I confess. So yes, correct. Stand corrected there. All right. The other problem with this whole scenario, besides the collusion, and now I've lost it. You distracted me, Kip. Now I got to move on. I'll come back to it.
On the road. So it's constantly happening that way. But also, you're absolutely right. We used to do a bunch of stuff with Frank Turek, who's an apologist here in America. And I used to listen to him. He does a lot of jokes in his presentations. And I used to tease him, dude, you do the same.
I now remember. We're going to go back to it. So the other thing that's going to happen is if you are Mormon missionaries going out, what you're going to see by being mentored is you're going to see the way that the senior person phrases things, or the way that when you guys come up with converts, what you are learning by the very endeavor of being a missionary is you're working out which phraseology works best to win converts. And when those work, you're going to use that phrase more often and more often. And what's going to happen is this gets passed down. Oh, this is the phrasing of how to answer that objection that, most settles the case. You don't get accuracy. What you get is what I call evangelical Darwinism, right? You get the ones preserved, the stories preserved that win converts. That's what you're going to see if you're literally just going out as missionaries as opposed to out to report history. Notice Jesus didn't send them out to report what was happening. He sent them out to win converts. When you are out to win converts, the historicity is a secondary concern, if a concern at all.
Challenge you to change your jokes for this talk, and of course he would never do that. But then he said to me,
no, Frank has like 4 jokes.
Jim, you don't think that you're doing the same stuff? And I was like, oh yeah, we're all doing that. But that's why it doesn't change much in terms of the content, because we're doing it so often.
Okay, that was the end of the clip. Boom. Did we answer, how can we trust ancient oral transmission of the Gospels? No, I don't think we did. Detective Wallace gave us this example of missionaries going out 2 by 2, and therefore that somehow is going to, I don't know, supposed to ensure that the same wording gets used over and over. I'm not convinced that's the case, but even where it's the case, that doesn't ensure accuracy. It ensures the evangelical bent and the constant improvement of the evangelical mission. But when we are concerned, when a skeptic is concerned about can we trust the ancient oral transmission of the Gospels, our concern is from the time of Jesus' resurrection to the time Mark was written, essentially. Mark being the first gospel. And guess what? The disciples weren't going out in pairs at that point in time. That wasn't when that was happening. Now, Paul sometimes went out in pairs, but that's not the original potential eyewitnesses. And the gospel. And if you want to tell me that we're ensured that the Gospels are okay, I don't know how this even fits, but that John and Matthew, who are the only ones who J. Warner Wallace would say were witnesses who were writing, that they had this more ingrained in their head because they went out in pairs to evangelize. I still don't see in any way how this makes me want to trust that time from 33 AD to wherever you want to say the gospel is written, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 50s, whenever you want to say they're written. It's at least 20 years. You didn't answer the question at all. So no big surprise from an apologist. I just wanted to point out, if you're an apologist, we're not concerned about the time while Jesus was alive. We're concerned about the time from when he died to when the Gospels were written. So if you're going to answer the question, answer that. All right. Now, the next video, well, I'll let it start and then I'll do a bit of an intro.
Hey, this is Dr. J talking to you about another one of Randall's rousing tweets.
Okay, so Dr. J, that's a cool name, right? Dr. J. This is Kurt Gyrus. He is, well, I know Kurt as the co-host of Mike Licona's Risen Jesus podcast. He's the one asking the questions of Dr. Mike Licona. So, yay for Kurt. Not many people know that he actually has a PhD in his own right. So good for you for branching out and starting your own YouTube channel. I was excited to find it. And he is talking about a rousing tweet. And that is in reference to Randall Rouser, who is a theology professor at a college in Edmonton, Alberta, not far from where I used to live, and the home of the greatest hockey team that there is. Well, that's not true, but my favorite hockey team and home of the best players in the league. How about that? I don't know. Anyway, home of the Oilers. Randall Rouser versus Kurt Giles. So this is a Christian versus Christian fight, everybody.
And this time around, it deals with atheists and whether the existence of God is obvious. Randall shared a tweet of Mike Winger. It's a clip of multiple times of Mike talking about how the existence of God is obvious. It's self-evident.
So for some reason, Kurt didn't include the actual clip in his video. He just described the clip. And I think that's a shame because I went and looked, again, with my source methodology. I went and looked and found the actual clip, and it's hilarious. So let's watch.
People know there's a God. Common sense. You're suppressing it. Truth of God is just obvious. It's obvious that there's a God. God has shown them. We're not agnostic. Just life experience tells you there's a God. Yeah. It's obvious. It's obvious. Okay, there must be a God. I mean, it's just common sense. It's obvious that there's a God because there's us. God makes sense. It's really just common sense. I think it's just plain common sense. And I'll say, or it's common sense. You look at the clouds and the days going around. Something started all this. There had to be a God. Like, it's just common sense. You have to go to college to stop believing this. You are fighting hard, suppressing that truth. There's a God and you know it. Common sense. You do not need a degree in philosophy to show that God exists. We're here. God exists. But in the end, they're just suppressing the truth. I'm scared for you. Creation shaking its fist at the Creator? There shouldn't be any atheists. It's irrational. There are really atheists. They're just they're darkened hearts and futile thoughts that have brought them to that point. This is a big, giant claim.
And
Good job, non-alchemist. That was hilarious. I thought it was a great supercut of Mike Winger just defending his God just by saying, it's obvious. Look at the trees. There you go. All right. So Kurt Giles he decided to weigh in on this for some, I'll let him tell the tale.
Randall takes issue with this, and so I shared a verse from Psalm 19, the previous verse. The heavens declare the glory of God, right? And the creation just reveals knowledge about God. Well, Randall takes issue with this, and so he took issue with the fact that I proof texted. So he says.
So for those of you who don't know what proof texting is, that's what happens when in the Christian circles where you take whatever position you want and you find verses that support it. And that they may be in context, maybe not be, but you kind of use the Bible as your justification. And in Christian circles, using the Bible is justification, right? That's what you're ultimately looking for. I don't care if science says it. I don't care if a scholar says it. If the Bible says it, we can justify it. And proof texting is where you kind of, pull a verse out of your hat to back the pony the ideological pony that you have right at that moment. I used to have a game going early days on my channel where I would actually have people write in and write a position, and I would find proof texts for both the yay and the nay answer to the question. And it's remarkably easy to find Bible verses to back the yes and no position on almost any question. All that said, that was just to explain proof texting. But when we're talking about atheists, which is what this whole thing is about, an atheist obviously is not going to value the weight and force of a Bible verse in the context of the conversation you're having. Kurt jumps in. Here's a Bible verse backing my position, and Randall wants to say, well, you know what? we're talking to non-believers right now, so maybe your proof texting doesn't help.
Sharing my tweet, Christians often defend the claim that atheists are in rebellion against God by proof texting a few Bible verses. But what if the prisoners of Auschwitz couldn't see the skies pouring forth knowledge because they were obscured by the puffing smokestacks of incinerating bodies? Randall,
Okay, so the first sentence there made sense. That was absolutely Randall saying, "Look, we're." Oh, and for those who don't know, Randall Rouser, Professor Rouser, considers himself a Christian. I know some people take exception to that. I don't. He calls himself a Christian, so I call him a Christian. So it's Christian a Christian fight, and he's just pointing out, hey, we're talking to atheists right now. Maybe your verse isn't helping. I do not know what the point of the saying was. Well, maybe the people looking out from Auschwitz couldn't see the sky because the smoke was covering it. That seemed weird, and I don't think we ever get closure on it, but that's fine.
here is really trying to touch a nerve with folks. He's pulling on really emotional chords, and
Maybe.
the reason why this is not a good argument is because exceptions don't disprove the rule.
No, it's not a good argument because it's not a good argument, but exceptions do disprove rules. If you have, or at least makes you change the rule. And here's the thing, Kurt, in the context of what we're talking about, you want to talk about, where am I? No, we're right here. We're in Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1 in, around, you guys know where it is. Romans 1:20 and thereabouts. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, been understood from what was been made, so that people are without excuse. No one has an excuse because of nature. So that is the rule. And if the rest of this passage basically affirms for a Christian that we are, well, depending on the Christian who are, but for many, that we're just suppressing the truth and righteousness. So if there are non-resistant non-believers, and if there are people who can know their own thoughts well enough to know that they are not suppressing that truth, they can absolutely toss out what Romans 1:20. This is actually the heart of the pivot of my channel, was me being frustrated with people quoting Romans 1:20 at me. I know my thoughts better than the Bible does. Sorry, I just do. The content of my own thoughts is the only thing I can know for sure. So if you want to throw a Bible verse at me, and that's counteracting the one thing I can know for certain, then sorry, your Bible's not helpful here, and it is not going to therefore be an authority for anything else. Exceptions, if you have an absolute rule, do disprove the rule. So you can't wander around saying, all swans are white. And I say, but there's a black one. And you say, no, exceptions don't prove the rule. All swans are white, even though there's an exception there. No, exceptions do disprove rules. Then you need to change your rule and say, most swans are white. As a rule of thumb, no longer an actual hard and fast rule. This is a silly thing to say, and it's sad.
Furthermore, he says, what if? What if this or what if that? Well, whataboutism is not an argument.
Pointing out exceptions to a rule is not whataboutism, though. You're whataboutisming with whataboutism. So whataboutism is the technique or practice of responding to an accusation or difficult question by making a counter-accusation, saying, oh no, what about you? Or raising a different issue. The whole point of whataboutism is you are distracting from, you're no longer addressing the point being made. That's why they call it that. Pointing out exceptions to a rule, saying, hey, there's a black swan over here, so your white swan rule doesn't seem to be good, is not whataboutism. That's pointing out an exception. That's actually arguing the point.
against the position that there are truths that can be obviously known. Let me demonstrate why we should think this is the case. If I said it's obvious that the sky is blue, it's obvious that the sky is blue, and Randall comes along and says, well, what about blind people? What about blind people? It's not obvious to them. Well, that's fair. It's not obvious to them.
Yeah, that's right. If you want to say, first of all, saying the sky is blue is weird because right now the sky at my house is black. And an hour ago, it was kind of a lovely orange-pink hue. Earlier in the day, it was kind of gray. Like, the sky is not always blue. But let's just say let's set all that aside and say in a moment where you're picking a location at a time where the sky is blue and you want to say it's obvious. And if, Kurt, your position is that it is obvious to every human who has ever lived that the sky is blue, and someone says, well, it's not actually because it isn't as obvious to a blind person, that is an attack on the obviousness of it. It is not an attack on whether the sky is blue. So, again, you may want to be saying that maybe you're the kind of person that says, well, Romans 1:20 doesn't say that it's obvious to everyone that there's a God. But that's what Romans 1:20 is used for by a lot of Christians, bludgeoningly, and how this whole thread started.
But it doesn't mean that it's not obvious to everybody else that the...
So, for everyone for whom the sky is blue is obvious, it's obvious that the sky is blue. Kurt, you've created a tautology that is useless. When we're going to strap this later to God, for everyone for whom God is obvious, it's obvious that there is a God. And the fact that there's some people for whom it's not obvious, those are exceptions. That doesn't disprove the rule. No, it means you've created a stupid tautology that means nothing. I'm going to beat this horse a little bit. For everyone for whom God is obvious, it's obvious that God exists. Like, that doesn't help anybody.
Sky is blue. Okay, so this whataboutism doesn't defeat the position that it's obviously true that the sky is blue.
No. Well, it absolutely defeats the position that the sky is obviously blue to everyone, and makes useless your assertion that for those for whom the sky is obviously blue, the sky is obviously blue. Now, the thing about the sky being blue is that the sky isn't blue because it's obvious. That's actually not what we would appeal to. That you may appeal to how everyone comes to accept it incredibly quickly, but we understand enough about light that we know that the wave frequency, there's a certain range that we generally call blue. And of course, each person, let's not even get into the qualia of it, whether we're all experiencing blue the same, because that doesn't matter, because we'll be able to say mathematically, there's a certain range of frequencies that we want to define as blue. And we want to say, hey, is what's being reflected from the sky right now, does it fall into that range? And there are many instruments that have nothing to do with humans that we can use to test that. And we can test whether the light that is being reflected from the sky right now at this point in time, this point of the day, falls in that spectrum. Then we would say, yeah, it's blue. And we could explain that to a person who's blind, who's never even seen the color blue, and they would be accepted because we would know what the definition of blue is, and we can measure light. This is not analogous to God, where the only way, Kurt, because I watched ahead, and if we watched Mike Winger say it for a minute and a half, the way you know God is just because it's obvious. Intuition is the entire way we know it. And so, again, weird to say, for everyone who intuits a God, God is intuitive. Not helpful. Especially not helpful for those who think that by not accepting this proposition, not just intuiting this proposition, you're going to burn in hell forever. That kind of sucks.
Now, we can have empathy for people in their situations where things are not so obvious. It
Oh, thank you for having empathy for me, that God isn't obvious for me. And you're just going to look, oh man, it's really sad that Paulogia, his intuition isn't the same. So he's going to burn in hell. That's too bad.
requires a certain analysis of the problem in order to provide a remedy to the problem.
So it's not clearly just I'm broken in some way. Might need to remedy my non-intuition about God. That needs to be, we need to look into the reasons why I'm not intuiting God and try and fix why I'm not intuiting God. Why aren't we trying to actually have evidence for God? That we don't need to have this intuition about it.
So we should be caring, but we also need to understand the problem. And what I'm suggesting here is that
To be clear, atheists are the problem. But they don't count. The fact that atheists exist don't wreck the rule that every single person intuits this. Don't let exceptions make Christians feel. So the thing about the Romans 1:20 is this is real. When you're and proof texting, it's all just actually to make Christians feel better, because Christians want to say, well, why that guy seems like he's reasonably smart, and we know he can put his shoes on, and he can drive around town and earn enough money to live, and he doesn't think God is real. What? How do I explain that? And it's like, well, now we're throwing a Bible verse at you to just to make you feel better about this. And that's all this is. This is why I say never use Romans 1:20 with an atheist, because it's going to make an atheist dig in even harder, because you're demonstrating that your Bible is flawed. But as a placebo for a Christian, it seems to work fine.
Randall is trying to present a cautious, careful approach to how we engage with atheists at the expense
Well, I'll let him finish.
of an actually warranted biblical position about how the existence of God is obvious.
Yeah, Randall, that jerk, he's out there trying to help Christians to have productive conversations with atheists so that they might come to have this intuition. That's the wrong way to do this. Don't try and effectively reach the people. We want this. Don't take away we need this placebo. This placebo is super important to us. And if you point out that this placebo doesn't help the atheist, in fact, even turns off the atheist, we don't like it. That doesn't help us feel good.
And can be seen, all of humanity, generally speaking, recognizes that there is a creator God. Now, we have different descriptions of what the creator God looks like, but atheism only composes a small portion of the human population, less than 10%, and even the
What does that have to do with anything? Again, Randall, why are you wrecking the 90% of us, pointing out that there's 10% who disagree when we're trying to say that everyone agrees with us, and you're saying, hey, some people disagree. And we're like, no, it's only 10%. What number, Kurt? What number would be fine? If there was 30% atheists, would that now break your rule? 50%, 60%? What number do we need for this rule that isn't a rule to be broken?
nuns, when you look at the nuns, they are willing to say that some higher being exists. They just don't want to affiliate.
No, some, yes, but nuns, there's actually, I think we should study this whole category of nuns, N-O-N-E-S, that are in surveys now saying, I just don't affiliate with any religion. We have no idea what those people believe. They may believe in higher power. They may not. I would agree that some of them may just, not connect to the big religion. Cool enough, but you can't make any sweeping statements about the nuns at all, other than that they've self-opted out of all religions.
So I really take issue with
Organized religions.
Randall's tweet-happy, trigger-happy approach here to what about so-and-so. Yeah, those are exceptions to the rule, but the rule is still warranted.
No, the rule is warranted only by your Bible verses. And if you don't think that God exists, then you don't think the Bible verses are authority. So your your version of warranted is this insular tautology that doesn't help. Anyway, there's a dead horse that I beat for a while. Hope everyone enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments, did I go too far? Did Kurt make a point that I missed? Maybe he made a point that I missed. Do you think Randall was in the right here? That Christians, if they want to reach out to atheists, that they shouldn't try and use these proof texts and these obvious places where the Bible contradicts the lived experience of an atheist? Who do you think is right here? Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the super chats. All right, moving on to topic number 5. And what I wanted to do, because I came across this the same day, I want to show for you, Kurt and everyone, a YouTuber, I think his name is RC Simon, who is exactly the kind of person that Kurt just described. For him, God is obvious. Oh, hold on.
This is how you know God is real. Look at this creation right here. And this
Look at this creation right here. That is a pile of mud that is hardened to rock in the most random of ways, with clear effects of gravity and erosion. That needed a creator? I've never seen anything in nature that less needed a creator than that dried pile of mud.
ain't no green screen. It's so real.
It ain't no green screen? You should have green screened yourself, man. Or am I wrong? Like, I'm not saying it's unattractive. It's a nice feature. But oh my goodness, that is the least designed piece of nature that I've seen since the snow pile in my front yard.
This is not by accident. This was created by...
It absolutely was by accident. Every piece. I don't care if you think God existed and God real and God created the world. God was not necessary to plan where each grain of dirt, I don't know. I mean, somewhere Stephen Bauman is yelling at me. The sediment, I think the sediment is the term we're looking for here. Where it landed, when the water came across it, how it hardened over time, everything about that pile of mud is undesigned. Holy cow. Kurt Giles, do you see now how skeptics look at this? Look at all these people saying, look at the trees. Now we're getting, look at this mud pile. Look at these rocks. How do you not see God? I don't see God. And you're not helping me out here.
a creator in Jesus' name.
Yeah. No. Call me cynical. Call me skeptic. Call me Han Solo. Actually, I would love to be Han Solo. Because Han Solo got shown that he was wrong. Show me that I'm wrong. Don't just tell me you know you're wrong. Just we need to find out what's wrong with you because you don't know you're wrong. All right. Next one. Frank Turek warning everybody. We're going to Frank Turek.
People might say, well, why didn't God create a universe where everyone believed then? Why does he have
Yeah. People might say that. That's not a bad question.
to create a universe where some people don't believe? Well, just because it's logically possible that God could create a universe where everyone believes doesn't mean it's actually achievable.
Wait. I thought your God was omnipotent, all-powerful. And all-powerful, the limit that modern philosophers put on this is that, well, everything that's logically possible God can do. He can't make a married bachelor or a square circle. Of course, those are logically impossible. But everything logically possible, my all-powerful God can do. Frank just said, well, sure, it's logically possible that God could have made a world where everyone believed, but it's not practically possible. Or maybe he couldn't. Like, Are you limiting your God, Frank?
Because if even though God is all powerful, he can't force free creatures to do what he wants, otherwise they wouldn't be free.
Oh, well, you've put a qualification in now that wasn't part of the original question. Because the original question wasn't talking about can you make free thinking, can you make the whole planet full of free thinking believers? Because now, Frank's saying, well, free things you may not want to believe. But here's the thing, Frank. Belief, you absolutely could make a planet where everyone, and I'm going to go with, I'm going to fall into the same trap as Kurt, but, anyone who's, everyone with full faculties and full sensory perception, because, of course, without any kind of rationality, you wouldn't necessarily do anything. But let's limit the scope to people with full use of their senses and faculties. You could make a world where everyone believed God existed very easily. You could have God show up every morning when the sun rose and do something goddish, say something, or you absolutely now you can't make everyone love that God, but you absolutely could incredibly easily, if you can make everyone who believes in the sun, the existence of the sun, could absolutely believe in the existence of God. It's just that's a no-brainer, right? Absolutely. Now, this whole free will part, Frank wants to talk, and William Lane Craig and others, they like to talk about how God has middle knowledge, where that is, not only does God know everything that will happen and has happened, but God is also aware, because he's aware of all true propositions, God is aware of all possible alternative timelines. So in a timeline, for example, where I was born with brown hair, or red hair, or a foot taller, or a female, or I could be born, all kinds, any different variation. God would know in all those variations, in which of those variations would I come to accept him, and which of those variations would I not. God has all the middle knowledge. Now, I accept that perhaps there is no world where, of everyone's free will, that everyone on the planet will accept and love, will love this God. But here's the thing. Because God has this middle knowledge, God knows in advance all the people who will believe him freely, and he knows in advance which people won't love him freely. Therefore, an all-powerful God could choose to make only the people who will accept him freely and not bother making the people who won't accept him freely. That violates no one's free will of any kind, because everyone you created would have, in other circumstances, accepted him anyway. Problem solved. And in fact, why do we even need earth for that? Why couldn't we just have made everyone straight in heaven? And God just God chooses to instantly have the people who would have believed in him be there in heaven, and all the other people just didn't need to exist anywhere. What's the matter with that, Frank?
So any universe God creates is going to have some people that don't trust in him. But
no. I just described the universe where God just would not make the people who of their free will wouldn't trust in him. Easy.
Does that require God to create nothing because some people freely choose to reject him? I don't think.
No, God has no requirements. God can do whatever he wants, and that's fine. If there is a creator God, that God can absolutely do what they want. However, if you also want to tell me that God is all loving, if you want to say that God is all knowing, and that God is all powerful, then you're starting to get into the realm of contradictions here. Because if hell is eternal conscious torment, and God knew that I was destined to be there, then I don't quite see how it's all loving to allow me to exist here. And that's fine. Maybe there's a bigger purpose, and maybe my cautionary tale is going to somehow, influence thousands of people. Fine, great, but I'm still going to hell. And God could have found other ways to influence those people. You're sidestepping the question here, Frank. And anyway, I'm not going to go there.
So,
all right. So that was Frank sidestepping the question. Don't let a Christian get away with these bad examples. The other thing that with the free will, of course, Satan, Lucifer, and his angels, if all those stories are true, they also had free will and also had full knowledge of God. They had absolute full knowledge of God and still were able to make a free will choice. So God can make creatures that both have full knowledge of him and still make a free will choice about whether to love him. So any excuse that Frank wants to give about this world is just unsatisfying. Okay, that was Frank. Now we're moving on to Eric Hovind. It's the greatest hits today, everybody. Eric Hovind.
Only 20% of Americans accept the 66 books that are bound together in what we refer to as the Bible are actually the words of God. According to the Barna Research Group, it's a record low. 20% of Americans now say the Bible is the literal word of God, and that's down from 24% the last time the question was asked back in 2017. And it's half of what it was at its high point in 1980 and the 1984 Barna poll results.
Well, that's great news, right, everybody? Great news. Let's find this poll. Where are we? So we're at this is the Barna poll from 2001. And I just need to, because I'm old now, I'm putting my glasses on to get all the details right. All right. So we got the Barna poll, and some of these questions, the Bible use, not that relevant to what we're talking about. Beliefs about the Bible. Okay, so U.S. adults, 26%. The Bible is the actual word of God and should be taken literally, word for word. All right, well, that's what Eric was talking about. And of course, that's the Eric Hovind Young Earth Creationist camp, right? And let's contrast that with the next option. The Bible is the inspired word of God and has no errors. That's pretty good, right? Inerrant, no errors. Although some verses are meant to be symbolic rather than literal. Now, what I don't get is how those 26% of people cannot realize that at least some verses are symbolic rather than literal. Like Jesus says that if Jesus says he's a door, is he literally a door? When God says he puts his wings around his believers like a hen, is God literally a chicken, or is he figuratively saying things? If when God says he's wind, like all these metaphors that are clearly metaphors. I don't know how anyone can potentially not put themselves in that camp. So, but fine. So, okay, we're a decreasing number of people are on this word for word route, and an increasing number are willing to say symbolic rather than literal. All right. So, not as good news as maybe I initially thought. The third option, the Bible is the inspired word of God, but has some factual or historical errors. 15%. Wow, that's treading on some interesting water. Although that's of course that's not the Christians I respect. Like Randall Rouser, in some cases of what I'm aware of his work, would be in this case, and the recent video I did with Dale Allison. He would understand that there's some factual and historical errors in what's going on, but still inspired. Like, what's the problem with that? So, look, Eric, we've only got 22%, so 9 and 13, 22%, so 78% say are not in the camp where the Bible is inspired. So it's still 78% of Americans think the Bible is the inspired word of God. You're still doing fine, man. Don't worry about it. You're still doing good, though I like the direction that this is going. I definitely love that, and that actually reminded me of not reminded me, it actually gives me an excuse to bring up this poll that actually just came out today, February 28th, just from this morning, from Arizona Christian University. The incidence of biblical worldview shows significant change since the start of the pandemic. Oh man, I had to click on that, right? The biblical worldview has been changing since the pandemic. And we're now saying that the 2023 incidence of the biblical worldview is 4%. That is low. Oh, but down from 6% 3 years ago. Okay, so I remember what the world was like 3 years ago, and North America is still pretty Bible-y, still pretty hepped up. So what we're talking about here is now these are the hardcore of the hardcore of the hardcore who think that only 4% of America has a biblical worldview. That, to me, is a little bit ridiculous. But let's see where the trends are going. So the integrated disciples, they possess a biblical worldview based on scores related to beliefs and behavior. So I'm guessing if you affirm anything other than, heterosexual marriage or relationships, you probably, don't get to fit in here. It's the strictest of strict, right? The every word of God is literal. That went down 2%. I mean, I guess if you're in, that's a third of the people fell away, but still not a huge drop. These emergent followers possess a significant portion of biblical worldview based on scores related to beliefs and behaviors, but not enough to qualify as having biblical worldview. So these are the people who think they're professing Christians, but the integrated disciples would say, you're not really a Christian. Probably don't count. Anyway, they dropped from 25 to 14, so 11% drop. That's a big deal. They lost like almost half, not somewhere between a third and a half. So that's a big drop. And where did all those people go? All those people are now world citizens. They possess a worldview other than biblical worldview, but might have a few beliefs and behaviors that are consistent with biblical principles. Oh, isn't that nice? We have a few beliefs. So, like, we don't murder every single person we come across, and, we don't steal everything. We occasionally comply with some biblical worldviews. Isn't that nice of us? But anyway, we went from 69, very nice, up to 82%. Hey, everybody. So, I guess I'm excited about this number too. All good. I think these are all going in the right direction. So thanks, Eric. I don't actually, it was funny, his little short video there didn't actually give an opinion or flavor about this. I'm assuming he thinks it's bad, but I took it as good news. So thank you for sharing that with everybody, Eric. And now we are moving on to yet another of the greatest hits. We're doing a lot of them today, everybody. Hope everyone's buckle in. We've actually only got 2 more. I shouldn't say that. We got 19 more. Now we'll see what the super chats do. We got 2 more today. We're doing Braxton Hunter from Trinity Radio. What does he have to say?
The little contradictions in the Bible. All of these can be explained in some way, right?
Okay. So Braxton is doing a short response to this person in the red toque who wants to talk about biblical contradictions. Now, if you followed my channel for a long time, you're aware of my nuances, my position. I don't actually think the biblical contradictions are that relevant or that important. I don't personally use it as an argument against the New Testament, though I certainly do feel like there are legitimate, real contradictions. I'm far more concerned with the collusion and the places where it's obviously the same and where it wasn't obviously, where it was obviously changed and obviously expanded upon and obviously edited and obviously modified for theological purposes. Those are far more concerned with me than, contradictions. But I understand that everyone sort of comes to their distrust of the Bible in different ways. So fine. So the red toque man, Bible contradictions were a bit of a problem for him.
But after a while, these pile up in my brain.
Okay, so you found things that seemed like contradictions, and then you read up on them. You found, this is not necessarily a contradiction. And
okay, that's super important. These things that were apparently contradictions, and the red toque man read up on them, and someone came up with a harmonization. So a harmonization is where you decide that, oh, there's a way that I can make these two stories work. So they may seem like they contradict, but if you accept scenario B, under scenario B, they can both be true. So maybe not a contradiction. We don't know if it's scenario B or maybe it's scenario A where it is a contradiction, but hey, we can't know because it's plausible or possible. It's not a contradiction. So not necessarily a contradiction. For me, when I was a Christian, every single proposed contradiction fell into that category of things that there's someone came up with at least a plausible way that they don't contradict. That's called harmonizing. That's the problem with trying to argue contradictions with the Christian. For them, if there's a 1 in a million chance that it's not a contradiction, they just go with that.
Each one's not necessarily a contradiction, but when you have so many, it creates like this cumulative case where, no, now this does kind of create a situation where I'm less likely to believe because there's so many of these things. But this,
I find it hilarious because Braxton, I believe, is among many Christians who have said that I don't understand what cumulative cases are. That, sure, this is a very small bit of evidence and it only points very slightly from my conclusion, but look, we have so many pieces of it. We have this cumulative case that Christianity is true. And you, Paul, you don't understand the power of a cumulative case. And Braxton will say, oh, cumulative cases work for me, but not for contradictions somehow.
falls prey to what's called the leaky buckets objection. And that is...
All right, I looked up leaky buckets objection, and I literally couldn't find it anywhere. So if anyone else has heard of the leaky buckets objection, if this is a thing, maybe it's just a thing in Braxton's school. I don't know. It's cool. Sounds cool. I just couldn't find it.
To say if you have one bucket that's got a small hole in it, and you say, okay, I get that this bucket looks impressive when I first put water in it, but that it's got a leak and it doesn't hold water, meaning it's not really a contradiction. So it doesn't...
This is a weird way to phrase this. So a working bucket, a bucket that holds water properly, is a contradiction in Braxton's illustration. And if the contradiction has a plausible out, then that bucket leaks. And so the contradiction doesn't hold water. I guess I had to really think this through a bunch, because I think obviously for me it's obvious that the opposite analogy would be that the Bible being true is the bucket that holds water, and that, you know, a contradiction would be what makes it leak. But then it's just, I guess each one is not a real leak, it's just an apparent leak. I don't know, this whole idea of that the holes in the bucket in Braxton's illustration are just plausible holes or possible holes or hypothetical holes means that I just can't on board with his room full of buckets like Sorcerer's Apprentice, and they're all maybe leak. Is it Schrodinger's leak? Maybe it's leaking, maybe not.
Really hold water, what I thought was a contradiction. But now there are so many other buckets, and yes, there's a hole in the bottom of each of these buckets, but there's so many leaky buckets that now putting them all together, they hold water. Well, no, if these contradictions can...
So a working bucket is a contradiction, and I guess the argument would be then that the contradiction in the Gospels is a problem for the Gospels. Now, lots of people are Christians and they don't even care if there are contradictions. And we just saw it in that poll that Eric was pointing us out. You know, there's a large group of Americans that, yeah, there's contradictions and there's problems, but that's fine. It's still inspired word of God. No problem. Anyway, this is a bizarre analogy. There's a bunch of buckets, and the leak is a possible solution. Anyway.
Be explained such that they're not contradictions. Then you have a leaky bucket, and having a bunch of leaky buckets doesn't hold any more water than if you have one leaky bucket.
Okay. That was not clear, Braxton. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm not smart enough to understand your analogy. Maybe if I was able to intuit that God existed, I would understand this better. All that to say, the fact that someone has imagined a hypothetical fix for a contradiction doesn't mean that the contradiction doesn't exist. So let's say that your son came home and told you that he, spent the evening in the local park, and he just, has had a quiet time with some friends. But at the same time, the police come and they say, hey, we saw your son was at a club and he got in a fight. Contradiction, right? Okay, my son can't have been in the park and also at the club. And, we look at the apparent contradiction. I'm making this up, so I'm hoping this works out. And then you say, oh, well, look, son, there's a receipt for getting into the club. There's a matchbook from the club or whatever. It's in your jacket pocket. And your son says, well, no, but my friend Barry, who did go to the club, he borrowed my jacket. See, plausible. He took my jacket. My jacket was at the club. I wasn't at the club. And there's a hypothetical whereby, oh, not a contradiction at all. Okay, plausible, maybe. But that doesn't mean that if these things start adding up, that you don't start suspecting your son's story. It's like, oh yeah, but Barry, he took a selfie of himself at the club and he wasn't wearing your jacket. He's like, oh yeah, Barry, he took my jacket, but he left it in the car. And then you're like, oh, okay, I guess that's plausible. But, I don't understand why Barry would put the receipt in his jacket in the car when he didn't wear the jacket into the club. But okay, all plausible. These are how, look, Braxton and all the Christians, this is how some of these harmonizations and rationalizations look to someone from the outside who doesn't already affirm and believe that this book is inerrant. They seem silly to us. And even though I never put it forth in argument, I just get it. So tighten that up. Understand that your harmonization doesn't automatically give you a get out of jail free. You have to convince people that your harmonization is more than just plausible, that it's the most likely scenario. And figure out this bucket analogy, because it didn't work. At least, or let me know in the comments. Let me know in super chats. Maybe I'm out to lunch. Maybe I'm dumb. Maybe Braxton's bucket analogy, where the bucket that doesn't work means that the scripture is real, somehow works as an analogy. Maybe it does. I don't know. Look at the mud, Paul. Yeah, exactly. Look at the mud. I don't get it, clearly. All right. We're down to our last one. Home stretch, everybody. It's an all-star day. Sean McDowell. Here we go. Oh, shoot. I was on the wrong one.
If most New Testament scholars don't take the gospel seriously, why should we? Actually, the premise...
Okay. Most New Testament scholars don't take the Bible seriously. Why should we? Sean is posing that as if that is a question that someone asked to him. So here's the thing. I, on my channel, could all day long use in my own words phrases the Christians say to me as an aggregate or even as a specific quote, but without unattributed specific quote, and say, hey, Christian asked me X, and here's my response. But I don't think anyone asked you that, Sean. Like, I'm skeptical that a skeptic asked you why the majority of New Testament scholars don't accept the New Testament. That doesn't seem like a question that anyone would ask. Because, A, it doesn't matter. Voting for scholarship isn't how scholarship works. It's the person with the best arguments and whatever. And also, New Testament studies is that weird thing where the vast majority of people who study New Testament are because they absolutely believe that it is important, inspired word of God. Very few people are in New Testament studies who aren't Christians. So, finding out what the New Testament scholars believe about anything is just going to be whatever the Bible says, because a large amount of them actually, in order for their terms of employment, have to sign a statement of faith saying the Bible is inerrant. So their very school. There's I can't go to Sean's school. I'd love to take a degree from Sean's school, Biola. Love to. but I can't because I won't sign their statement of faith in advance. So it's not a relevant question. I'm skeptical that a skeptic asked you this. So anyway, I would love it if you would actually play or show the comment of someone asking this, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe a skeptic asked him that, and if you're that skeptic, you stop asking that.
Of that question is,
what you should ask is, do scholars across the board, why don't they accept the New Testament, or historians across the board accept the New Testament? You need to include all the people. The tautology of the New Testament study, the near tautology, is unhelpful.
false. Most New Testament scholars at least take the major contours of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as being.
Some of you may know that there's 4 Gospels in the New Testament. There's also John. I thought it's very telling to me that Sean wants to dial back, and good on him. He wants to dial back well. At least we think that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are historic. We may not everyone may agree that John is. So he's dialed it back already. Fair. And thank you for doing so. He's trying to say that they take the broad curvature and say that it's historical. Do they?
Historical. So that Jesus formed 12 disciples that followed after him.
Okay. I think even if you took most historians who agree that Jesus was a historical figure agree that he had a group of followers. I don't know that how much consensus you'd have that there were 12. I think there's some thought out there that the number 12 might be more symbolic of the 12 tribes of Israel and have some other symbolism around 12. But they affirm to have followers. Realistically, it was probably far more than 12. It probably wasn't just 12, so it's not a problem. But maybe on this first one.
That he had a ministry of doing miracles, or at least it was perceived that he did miracles.
So that depends on what you mean. I'm glad you qualified that Jesus was perceived as doing miracles. Here's the thing. We have no idea if Jesus during his lifetime was perceived as doing miracles. That you would not get broad consensus on. Of course, within the New Testament scholarship, those who believe that Jesus rose from the dead, sure. But if you're looking at broadly the historical case, broadly, people who study literature, all this kind of stuff, no, they're not. There's no good reason to think that during his lifetime that people believe this. Would love that kind of evidence, but we don't have it. It may well have been something that emerged after he died. So depends on what you mean.
That he reached out and cared for the marginalized. Yeah.
No, that is not broadly. That's not broad consensus at all. Reached out and cared for the marginalized. We don't know if he did those miracles. We don't know. Good grief, no, we don't know what he said or did, or that he reached out to marginalized.
A remarkable treatment of women.
Remarkable treatment of women? No, that is not something that New Testament historians agree on at all. And forget, if you're not sure what Jesus did, first of all, you'd be able to get great debate even if you accepted every single word of the Gospels as true, whether or not he treated women exceptionally. Certainly he had some kindness towards women. You'd have to define what this quality, this word means here exactly. I do believe that later on the Christian message became very palpable to women. It's a whole thing. Great. But no, that Jesus, wow, no. These are not the broad swaths that people agree on. They agree that he was like a Jew, that he was in and around Jerusalem, that he had followers, and that he died. And maybe that his earthly parents' name were Mary and Joseph, maybe, and maybe they had brother James. That's where you're going to get some agreement. Your stuff here, no, I think you're just putting that in because you want Jesus to be seen as looking at the marginalized and appealing to women, because that is what your students are going to want to hear about Jesus' love.
That he was crucified by Pontius Pilate. and his
That he was crucified, yes. The Pontius Pilate part, maybe.
closest followers believed he had arisen from the grave.
We don't know if what his closest followers believed at all. What we know is that some people came to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. We have no idea what his closest followers believe because they didn't write it for us. So we have reports. We don't even know if the people, we don't know if Peter really was his closest. Maybe? Was he? I don't know.
Simply false that most New Testament scholars don't take seriously Matthew, Mark, and Luke on the major contours of those gospels.
So yeah. Back to the start. So absolutely, I would agree with Sean. Most New Testament scholars take the Bible the Gospels historically seriously, and that's a nothing burger. Who cares what New Testament scholars accept or don't? What you need is a heterogeneous view of what do the people who are skeptical about the Bible, along with those who affirm every single word is absolutely true, what do all those people have in common? That's a much more interesting question. Okay, we got to the end of our videos. Thank you for sticking with me. Now we're going to have a chat with everybody. We are going to check out our super chats and see what people had to say in the comments. All right. Christian Apologetic. We have a super chat from Hank Says for $5. Christian Apologetics is all simple tricks and nonsense. Han Solo hashtag willing. Yes. So Han Solo hashtag wing. Yes. Simple tricks and nonsense is the Han Solo quote on the Millennium Falcon from episode 4. Well done, Hank Says. I appreciate that. Lorality became a member for 6 months. Yay, Paulogia while I chore. I'm sorry that you're choring. I hope that we made this less of a chore. Your chores for choring. So thank you for being with us. Lorality, I think that's how you say it. Undecided Middle Ground also became a member. Welcome. Jeff Cochran also became a member. So I'm hoping that you guys are having fun with all the various emojis that you can have. I want to actually spend some time this month getting more emojis in for the members. So if you are a member and there's a certain emoji you want, let me know in the comments what I should add in. Should we add in Ken Ham? We've had suggestions for like Yosemite Sam because of some of the stuff that's been going on with Toast to Toast, all these kind of things. So, yeah, let me know, and hopefully you're enjoying the black hole as the people on the Toast to Toast show. Very much appreciate. All right, thank you. Skeptics and Scoundrels for $5. Kurt is only 0.000, I don't know how many zeros, 0.0000125% of the Earth's population, so we don't need to worry what he thinks. That is an excellent point. If your group is a small enough group, you can't be an exception, and we shouldn't consider what you think. Very good. I like it, Skeptics and Scoundrels. Also, I haven't been to your channel in a bit. I need to go fix that. So I hope you're doing some good stuff over there, as I expect you are. Jeff Cochran for $2. Empathy. Empathy is not equal to empty empathy. I don't really know what colon equals means. I'm assuming that's like not equals. Anyway, I'm sorry if you need to explain this one to me, but yes, empathy is not equal to empty empathy. Too young to feel this old. For $5, thank you for everything you do, Paul. You're incredibly welcome. Thank you for supporting me and making all this possible, and for hanging out with me, because that's the reason to do the live things, is to hang out with you guys. That's what makes it fun. All right. Mark Rothenbuehler writes, if God can harden Pharaoh's heart, then he can harden mud into an exposed, weathered rock. Well, that's true. But did God shape that? Like, do we look at that clump of mud and say, well, yes, obviously, God had that exactly specifically shape in mind. And like God had a mold for that, like a sandcastle mold that you got at Walmart. And that's clearly designed. No, like that's the most random ass shape that I've ever seen. And to say that God needed to do that, it wasn't even like the majestic Rockies, which are also random ass, but they're like a mixture of different types of rock and obvious shearing. And and like just so much more majestic and bewildering and awe-inspiring than that dried clump of mud. Man, didn't like the mud. And I know that mud's not the right term. I'm sorry, Stephen Bauman, if you're watching this. All right. Skeptics and scoundrels, again, nothing to say, just testing the member benefit. Well, that is a benefit of your membership, is that you get to insert a super chat. So thank you for doing that. We appreciate. Mike Ams for $10 US. Thank you so much for supporting us. Wrote, speaking of Sean McDowell, if Paul did indeed die a martyr, which I know you've mentioned you in General Grant, how would his martyrdom have been left out of Acts? Curious to know your thoughts. Well, that is an excellent question. So, assuming that Paul died a martyr in the hands of Nero around 64 AD, and if you think that the book of Acts was written after 64 AD, which most scholars do, and I do, put it past the destruction of the Second Temple, why didn't he include it? Well, lots of reasons. And I know I've gone into this with Bart Ehrman in some of my videos. He has a laundry list of them. But I know one of the ones that really struck me was that literally this is supposed to be a triumphant book, right? That you're supposed to be thinking about the triumph of Christianity. You're not supposed to be thinking about the martyrdom and the death and the sadness of all these things. So, again, that in the ancient biographies, again, this is an addendum to Jesus' story. It's not the Peter and Paul sad show. Also, like, they didn't resurrect, and it creates kind of this bleak thing. It also emphasizes that Jesus didn't come back in their lifetime, which was a lot of what they were preaching. So you write Acts just from that perspective of what happened before that time. The destruction of the Second Temple, for example, is not in there either. So for me, there's lots of plausible literary and theological reasons why you wouldn't want to emphasize Paul's death. So that's good enough for me. I understand that that's not good enough for others. I guess you can let me know whether that works for you. Grays 174. What's your take on why consciousness is a thing? Good question. So I think that consciousness is a thing because it is an emergent property of the brain when our thought processes get complicated enough that begins to basically emerge as what we would call consciousness. So, for example, I think that worms have a level of consciousness, for example. I think that virtually every creature with some level of thought have some level of consciousness. So the definition of consciousness among some is what it is like to be. So is there a thing what it is like to be a fly? Versus is there a thing what it is like to be a lamp? And most people would kind of, again, you shouldn't go with intuition here, but there are reasons to say it doesn't seem like there is a thing that the lamp is experiencing things, but perhaps the fly is experiencing things, and that therefore it is something to be like a fly, and that is consciousness. And it seems like that there is that doesn't require any kind of another substance. It is more just those experiences that your brain, if it's complicated enough. Shannon, I wish Shannon Q was here to explain it much better. That when you add those up, when you get the cumulative case, that eventually what emerges is something that there is a thing that it seems like to be me, there's a thing that it seems like to be you, and there's probably some enough that's in common that we can say, well, there is a kind of what it is like to be a human. And for me, that's incredibly low bar. That the processes of our brain absolutely can get us to the point where there is a quality of what it is like to be me. And so for me, that explains consciousness well enough. If you want to see that consciousness is something beyond that or something other than that, then I get why maybe you need to look other places, but that's why definitions are important. All right. MP Smith 47304, my favorite YouTube atheist channel. I get so frustrated with the it's obvious argument. When I was deconstructing, I desperately wanted it to be obvious. It wasn't. Yes, I agree. I desperately wanted Christianity to be true. It wasn't obvious to me, and I times, and why that would not take away my free will to either love him or not. I'm not convinced whether I would love him or not. I need to meet him first. I need to think that he's exists before I can tell you whether I'm going to love a person. You can't just, hey, here's a picture of a person on your dating profile. If you meet him, are you guaranteed going to love him? It's like, I don't know. I don't know. So again, God can remedy this. I can't, but God can. Thank you so much for that, MP Smith. Shannon Q. OMG, you can. Shannon became a member for 1 month and submitted a free super chat, and now you've blown it. So now when we're doing our toast to toast on Friday, you've blown it. Too bad. Anyway, thank you, Shannon. I always appreciate your support, including letting me stream tonight. I appreciate you. All right, and last one, I think, Tin Qasim, supporting Shannon's boozing for £5. Well, we appreciate that, Tim. Shannon's boozing she will feel supported in that endeavor, and I will head out soon to also support her. Shannon says she's here, but she's not paying attention really. Well, that's probably how most people have been watching this show for the last couple hours that we've been on, hour and 40 minutes or so. That's probably the best way to watch this channel. Have it on and not pay attention. Grace 174 for $2 writes, do you think any interpretation of ECT is moral? So ECT being eternal conscious torment. I'm assuming if you mean something else, you'll have to clarify for me. 1 second. I went that whole time without having a drink. And this is my lovely For the Bible Tells Me So mug. Glass. All right. Do I think any interpretation of... No, I don't think any version of eternal conscious torment is moral, because my definition of morality involves well-being and reduction of harm. I see no circumstance where eternal conscious torment is ever proportional in a way that makes sense. So no finite crime can be proportional to an infinite punishment. That just doesn't make sense on its own. But also, like at some point, the justice is earned, right? So if, like, let's say you murdered someone and you murdered someone young and they would have had 80 more years to live. So, you get 80 years of punishment, or let's multiply that by 1,000. So you get 80,000 years of punishment for that thing. Surely 80,000 years of punishment is enough for that person who also has an eternal soul. So they only forfeited, a meager 80 years of life on earth. So they're not out that much really in light of eternity if we're all living eternally. Or let's multiply it by 1 million. So he is tortured for 80 million years for that. Fine. Still, at the end of 80 million years, enough's enough. The other problem with, I just don't even get torment at all, because if it's a punishment, fine, but you're not giving that person a chance to correct anything. So normally when you look at punishment models, both in parenting or raising a pet or in society, right? So you can use punishment as retribution. You can be mad at your dog for doing something, and maybe you punish them a little bit because you're angry. Or maybe you're punishing them because you want to correct behavior. Well, once you're past the point of Judgment Day, God can't correct our behavior with this torture in hell, right? It's now entirely retributive. There is no correction, and there's also no. You also sometimes in society you'll punish a person for a certain crime to be preventative, to be a deterrent for other people from committing the same crime. Like, oh, I don't want to steal because, oh, my buddy stole something and he went to jail, and so I don't want to go to jail, so, that's a deterrent for me. The eternal conscious torment of hell also can't serve as a deterrent, right, for anyone, because everyone's fate is sealed. So no, that's a long answer. The short answer, no. ECT, I don't see, someone can correct me if you have a better way of looking at it, but I just don't see how it's moral under any definition of morality that I'm familiar with. Skeptics and Scoundrels, right? There's a fire in your future. Thanks, Shannon. There is a fire in Shannon. There's always a fire in Shannon's future, and many times it's the immediate future. It's a thing she loves. All right. Jeff Cochran writes, empathy is a nonsense word empathy. Empathy is a nonsense word I made up. Portmanteau of empty and empathy. The symbol that is sometimes used in mathematics to indicate a definition. Okay, well, it's been a while since I did math. I'm sorry. Not one I was familiar with. So anyway, empathy. So it's not quite empathy. It's empty and empathy. That makes sense. Empty empathy. And a dog just came in. All right. And I think that probably is my sign that we're wrapped up and it's time to end the stream. So thank you everyone for hanging out with me for this all-star lineup. We had Star Wars, we had Indiana Jones, we had Frank Turek and Eric Hovind and Braxton and Sean, and I'm J. Warner Wallace and Kurt Giles. Oh, look, we got a dog on camera. Hi, doggy. Well, there's a treat for everyone who stayed to the end. Hi, pups. Yeah, she clearly needs me. So I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much, everyone. And until next time, later.